you're taking those same ingredients and you're the 5-star Michelin chef being able to lay those out in a better organization to where it takes and elevates that dish to something completely new and better.
Call it Keynes and Priest is how we originally started talking about it, but keynesandpriest.com wasn't available, so we had to go with something else. So we went with Crown and Covenant Foundation. Crown representing the resource gatherers, the entrepreneurs, the business leaders, the folks that went into the world and built wealth. Covenant representing the people that were called to vocational ministry. And Foundation is our giving arm, how we give to those ministries that we're working with.
And so you start to think very creatively with your business on not just how do I increase profit and increase margin so that we can make more money. It's I'm applying that same strategy that allows you to increase margin and make more money to how do I unlock resources to grow the kingdom and bless people.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden we have 2 people running full-time ministries on our for-profit staff.
Yeah.
And guess what? The business is still being blessed.
Welcome back to the Marketplace Kings Prosperity Podcast. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe so that we can continue to create more content just like this. Our prayer and our hope is that you get something out of these podcasts and you're able to apply into your life and into your business. It's one thing learning principles and theories in school, but it's another thing hearing actual stories of how real marketplace leaders are impacting their spheres of influence in today's economy. So be sure to put a comment below and we want to hear from you. Welcome back to the Marketplace Kings Prosperity Podcast. I'm here with some new friends. As you can tell, we've got a different setup today. I've got 2 friends, John Myers and Patrick Palmer today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you,
Man, happy to be here.
So you guys are part of a ministry / business. What was the name of it?
Crown and Covenant Foundation's the ministry, DL title.
So Crown and Covenant Foundation, I really want to get to talk about that today. And so my plan is I've got an introduction for John, and we're going to talk a little bit about his business. And then I'm going to introduce Patrick, and we'll talk some about his story. His story's pretty unique. So today I'll start with your introduction, John. John is the co-founder of MLB Title. It's a Dallas-based independent title agency. He built it from the ground up. And that before that, he led major acquisition teams overseeing more than $700 million in real estate transactions across ventures like Suntex and Island Global Yachting. But what truly defines John isn't just his business success, but it's his heart. He's a husband over 20 years, a dad to 2 thriving kids, and a co-founder of Crown and Covenant Foundation with Patrick Palmer. His mission's clear: to help leaders steward their influence, resources, and relationships for kingdom impact. He's also an endurance athlete, a jiu-jitsu practitioner, Golden Glove boxer, Ironman finisher. So don't mess with him. What I hear you saying. But welcome to the podcast. And what really caught my attention was this Island Global Yachting. That has like my name written all over it. I just want to. I'd want to work there.
Marina business.
Okay.
So a lot of my acquisition work was travel in the U.S. Caribbean and Mexico buying marinas. So mega yacht marinas, boating marinas, both lake and ocean. So fun business.
Sounds fun. I mean, I want to have a yacht one day. That'd be great. One of those bucket list things. So, well, take me back to the early days with MLB Title. How did your faith kind of shape this vision, and when did you start it? How did it begin?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, I mean, faith in the beginning didn't really have much to do with it leading up. We were young guys, me and my best friend that played soccer with in college, really just wanted to be entrepreneurs, wanted to have something we control and that we build. And, entrepreneurs make more money and, you have more control. And that was what was kind of driving us. And probably starting in our mid-20s, we kind of came up with every idea you could think of, every dumb idea from, shower curtains to whatever, that none of them really went anywhere. And, at about 31, My son was 3.5, I think. And, I'd been traveling a lot on acquisitions. So, in New York, I think at that time, pretty much every week for a couple months working on a big deal. And, it's funny. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'd been out of town a lot and, my son was in the room and, God just kind of like hit me. He made it very clear that, my purpose and where I needed to be focused was a husband and a father. And so for me, it was just kind of like this download that I can't be in a position where another grown man is determining when I get to be a father and when I get to be present as a husband. And so, it was just like, hey, I have no choice, right? It's not about going and making more money. It's not about control. It's about if I'm going to fulfill my purpose as a great father and great husband, I have no choice but to start a company and be able to control my time and control what my priorities are in life.
That's good.
And the funny thing is, we had spent 6 years coming up with ideas weekly. Nothing ever happened. From the night that hit me in my room next to my son, 6 months later, we founded the company.
So did you have a legal background? Because I know the title business is heavy.
No, my business
legal.
partner was a lawyer at Hughes & Luce and then K&L Gates. My background was all finance and private equity acquisitions.
Right.
So we both had worked with title companies a great deal.
Okay.
So we weren't in the business, but we were clients of the business.
So I'm sure startup was difficult or challenging. What were some lessons you learned through the startup season?
Yeah, it's definitely, you got to kind of jump out. We both got a $100,000 line of credit from a bank, and kind of that was the parachute we had to jump out. And I think one of the lessons, when you're starting a business and you want to be this great leader and you want to get good people and you want to, be there for them. What was really hard in the beginning years is you don't have any track record, you don't have any credibility, right? So getting the top-notch people to come to a brand new startup is just not feasible. And so you're just kind of hiring whoever you can. And so, some of those people, right, came with different sets of issues, and you're really excited and you're really inspired to bless people and help people and grow people. And what was very hard to find was that balance between mentoring and trying to grow someone and kind of realizing when that's not going to happen and you have to let them go, right? Mm-hmm. Where me trying to grow and bless this person is actually being a bad fiduciary to my other people or to my investors. And so, it's kind of the old cliche, hire slow, fire fast, but that sounds great. But when you care about people, it's tough. And so what we had to realize, and it took a long time and a lot of mistakes, you had to realize that at some point you can't reparent people. There's some things you can grow, some things you can mentor, and some things, they're just not going to get there. And that was hard. That was hard because, you like the people, they were good people, but there was something just missing about their ability to step up and operate at the level we wanted to operate at. And so balancing what is loving, right? Loving to this person at the expense of this person is not loving. And I think God does have an equation where there's an ability to be loving to all, but that often comes with tough decisions and a little tougher love. Yeah. And so that was a process to kind of work through.
Man, that's so good. I actually had a client that we were talking about the same thing, same exact deal. He had an employee that he loved as one of his best friends, and he had to let him go. But at the same time, you start a business, and there's some people that are great for that season. But then as you begin to scale and as you grow and you're setting up your processes, you want to do things with excellence. Things, if they don't grow with you, you have to make those hard decisions.
Exactly.
How do you balance? I know a lot of business entrepreneurs that I've talked to, there's this balance of hard work and ambition, and in high performance, how do you maintain that level at the same time, not falling into the trap of striving and burnout and not trusting the Lord for your business?
Yeah, I think in the very beginning, you have a lot of energy, right? We were 31 and super excited. You can kind of muscle through some of it. But I think, long term especially, you've got to kind of wake up and kill the flesh, right? You got to wake up and remind yourself every day, we're not going to chase money. We're not going to chase things. We're not going to chase adoration.
Is that something you had to learn?
Oh yeah, no, that was a
on
big
the
process. I mean, killing the flesh. Everybody says go kill the flesh. Well, killing the flesh is a day in, day out, overtime thing. And in my 20s, definitely was striving for all that. And you kind of begin to evolve. And I think what's allowed us to sustain and grow the business now is I have gotten to a point where I've kind of killed the flesh of chasing money, killed the flesh of chasing ego. And when you're chasing blessing people, when you're chasing loving on your team, when you're chasing, I want my investors for this to be their best investment, and that is what you're waking up and meditating on, your resilience is a lot more, and I think Navy SEALs actually say it a lot, right? It's if I'm trying to finish this for myself, I may break down, but if I'm trying to finish this because the guy next to me is injured and I've got to put him on my back, what they say is your ability to do for others brings out a much greater strength than your ability to do for yourself. And so I think when you start to understand the power of selflessness, which is difficult, right? Again, you're fighting the flesh every day on that. But when you get that, it's almost like a superpower, right? Selflessness and dependence on God, the resilience isn't even really a thing, right? Because now you're fueled by something bigger than yourself. And again, that's a ebb and flow, right? That's not you're there every day, but once you start to realize that and you bring yourself back to that, it kind of makes things a little bit different.
So we were talking before, and you mentioned that you made God your investor or CEO. So talk to me about kind of giving your business over to God.
Yeah, and I think, my business partner's a believer too. I think from the beginning, we wanted to do things the right way. We wanted to, follow God, but it was, it's still compartmentalized. It was still, what does that really even mean? I don't even think we knew, right? Just try to be a good person morally. But a couple years ago, so not even that long ago, really, a few years ago, I went with another brother in Christ and we went out in the wilderness and did this thing. And it was crazy. When you really fast and spend time in the wilderness, like Jesus kind of did before and after every big act, right? But I had never really done it and spent 12 hours in the wilderness by myself. And I've never, to this day, never been spoken more clear to me from God when I actually went and put myself in that environment. It was like a booming, in my head, just booming voice, sell your business. And, and I'm out there by myself and I'm kind of like, what do you mean sell my business, right? I got a big team that depends on this. They're happy. It's blessing their family. I've got investors. Like, I'm sorry, God, like you're going to have to give me more. You're going to, I just can't do that. Like, you're going to have to roll something out more for me. His kindness, he did. And it was, sell your business to me, and it was kind of like, okay, well, what does that really mean? Right. And you just kind of work through it, and it's really letting go, right? We say hold things loosely, things of this world turn to dust. And I think that's really what happened. It's not just be a good person, try to treat people well. It's no, God is the owner and boss of this business and you work for him. So you don't make decisions that your boss hasn't approved or weighed in on, right? And so now every decision you make, you're bouncing it off of wisdom. You're bouncing it off of, biblical men and brothers, and truly making decisions based off of what biblically you should do in that point in time. And I'll say, people will be like, well, how do you know if you're doing that or not? Or what does that look like? And for me, one of the litmus tests I've found is if you're not making a decision periodically, I'm not saying every day, but periodically, that makes zero logical sense to a non-believer, then you're probably not really listening to God in your business, because God's ways are higher. His vision is
say
deeper.
that again.
If you're not making a decision periodically that makes no sense to this world, right? If you're talking to a non-believer and you're telling them 1 + 1 is 3, they're like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. It's 2. It's 2. That's obvious. That's when you're truly listening to God, and that's when you can watch God work. When you're doing something that is against everything you think is logically, everything your flesh tells you to do, and you make that decision, and sometimes you get to watch God work.
Do you have an
Sometimes you don't.
example of something?
Uh,
that,
yeah, I
God
mean,
asked you to do
there's
that was
actually
like, this makes no sense.
there's a few examples, but one that's probably appropriate to share is, not too long after the wilderness, right? So I was in a really good place and hearing God clearly, and it can be hard too if you don't have all believers in your business,
Yeah,
right? Very few
yeah.
businesses have all believers. So you got to kind of step out and step up and say, we're doing this. Well, why are we doing this? Because God said so, you
Yeah.
know? And the example was we were in a transaction, it was a residential deal, and I don't remember all the details, but basically there was kind of a bad actor that was a principal that shorted the transaction, call it 10, 15 grand. And funny enough, this guy was a pastor at a small church and was not acting like a pastor. Basically, just kind of was not, I mean, it was his 15 grand to spend and just wouldn't do it. And everybody's, kind of up in arms in the transaction. Everybody's scared. Who's it going to fall on? Somebody's got to come up with this money. And it was one of those where it had nothing to do with us. I mean, we were the middleman. I mean, it was just very clear that it wasn't anything we did or our obligation. And I was pretty upset, right? Especially a believer's acting like this
Yeah.
and, what's going on. And we prayed about it with my COO. And, God just kind of told us, write the check, $15,000 check, not insubstantial money,
Yeah.
and it made no sense. And I was angry about it, really. I mean, it was like, this isn't right. Like, this guy's supposed to be a believer. It's his 15 grand, And so we didn't even really understand it, but I was in such a good place with God that in hearing his voice, it was kind of one of those where I don't like it, I don't get it, and I don't even necessarily agree with it, but I'll be obedient. And in his kindness, because you're like, why? Why would you even have me do this? And so we did it. And what ended up happening in his kindness, he did kind of show us pretty quickly, the realtors, the bankers, they're calling us up and being like, why are y'all paying this? Like, this is not, y'all shouldn't be paying this, whatever. And we just got to explain to them, well, like, hey, we're a believer business. We were praying about it and we're being obedient. And this is what we feel God called us to do. Well, then it turns out like, well, they were believers and the inspiration they had.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, that's just, amazing. And we never really did get to see or get any feedback on what happened with the pastor. But I mean, my prayer is that he was going through financial troubles and maybe he is a really good, godly guy, but because of that stress, it was taking him in a bad place. And maybe that act of grace that was undeserved, maybe that act of kindness put him back on a path. I mean, I'll never know, right? But God did allow us to show us pretty quickly how it really inspired and blessed some other believers to see that kind of act that made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they knew it was God. And I think if you're not having those type of moments, at least on occasion, you may be still making decisions on your own wisdom.
Wow.
So good.
That's awesome. I want to introduce Patrick here. He's been very quiet in the middle.
Not normally.
So Patrick's journey began in a season of brokenness, living out of his car, searching for purpose, until a radical encounter with Jesus at 19 changed everything. From here, God began writing a story of redemption and impact that's touched thousands. Patrick went on to mobilize young people through inner city mission trips, launch an anti-sex trafficking ministry that's helped over 269 women find freedom in a single year, and later serve as the Chief Advancement Officer for Our Calling, where he helped grow the organization from a staff of 12 all the way to a staff of 56 in 4 years. But Patrick's calling didn't stop there. Alongside his friend and business partner, John, they have moved into a new venture called Crown and Covenant Foundation. It's a kingdom venture that helps business owners shift from ownership to stewardship, invests in high-impact ministries, and deploys resources to multiply long-term kingdom impact. So, welcome, Patrick.
Thank you.
I want to hear about your radical encounter with Jesus at 19. We talk a lot on our channel about Joseph's life in the pit. This sounds to me like literally in the pit at 19, and God raises you up out of that
Man, God is so kind.
story.
Unlike Joseph, I threw myself in the pit, so it was self-induced pain and depravity. Just seeking the flesh. And whenever I always say like this, I just wasn't really good at not being a Christian. I was a drug user and have a wonderful family, came up in a great household, and there was no like on paper reason for me to end up where I was. But after a few, well, I'd really say it's like one particular encounter. My family had all moved from California to Atlanta, Georgia to start a ministry out there, and I was flying in Christmas Eve to visit them, flying out the day after Christmas to go back to my mess. And I just remember getting into that airport, landing in Atlanta, and I'm homeless. I'm smelling bad. I have like spider bites. I had like brown lacroix spider bite that had rot in my neck and my hand and my back, and sick, had a fever. It was just in a bad spot, really bad spot. And my family all was there at the airport, and they surrounded me, and they, just like a healthy family would do, loved me, brought me in, and hugging. And I just remember telling the Lord, I go, God, I don't know about like all these rules that I've understood Christianity to be, but I do know I want to be about part of this love. And where I saw it as rules before, I end up learning it's just about being a part of God's family, about his part of his culture. It's just like when you're in the faith and you're following hard after Jesus, they're not rules anymore. It turns into a lifestyle. It turns into a playbook on, you live this way, you get these type of outcomes. To John's point in that story, sometimes living this way doesn't make perfect sense on paper, but it's just about an obedience story. It's like all my favorite people of the faith, all my heroes of the faith, they all have this in common. They all just say yes to the Holy Spirit consistently. God asks them, they say yes. God asks them, they say yes. And then you watch that journey, and it compounds, call it over 10, 20, 30 years. Then you start seeing these great heroes of the faith. Like, how'd you get there? I said yes.
One little step at a time.
One step. Yeah.
So your passion's ministry. What specifically within ministry is your passion?
Yeah, I think it's, advancing the kingdom of God is my passion. I felt when I was 22, 23 years old, I was praying. My dad's a pastor, and I was driving a van to go pick up some people from a neighborhood to bring them to church, to my dad's church on a Sunday morning. And I was like, God, I know I'm called to ministry, but the only idea I had for ministry in my head was you'd be a pastor.
Yep.
Right. That's what I thought. That was like the pinnacle of ministry. And I go, public speaking, God. And I don't know. Yeah, like I don't know if I could prepare a message every Sunday type thing. And I was just asking, like, what would you have me do? And you know how the Holy Spirit just will put something in your heart that you never thought of before. You couldn't have created it yourself. And I heard him whisper to my heart, you're going to be a producer for my kingdom. And I'd had this like little short stint of working for a TV show. And at that TV show, you're on set, the director, the grips, the property guys, the actors. But there's this group of people that you rarely see on these sets, and that's the producers. And it's a small group of people who make the decisions. They approve the script, they approve the budget, they hire the actors, they do everything basically. But they sit in small rooms and they make big decisions that impact everybody else. And I really felt like the Holy Spirit was saying, like, I want you to sit in small rooms to help make decisions that impact my kingdom. And so that turned to my North Star, and that's just what I've been chasing after ever since. So what I'm interested in ministry is find high potential kingdom impact ministries that we could come around, sit in those small rooms with them to help them really gear up to hit their total potential. Whether that's helping with operational excellence or their fundraising or whatever it might be, but coming in and helping them hit what God's called them to do.
That's so good, because that's that lands into part of my passion, is to see people come into their fullness of what they're called to do and to become. And I have had the opportunity to consult some business clients and help them kind of grow and scale their business. And I'm like, this is great. This is fun. Being able watching them grow and become something more than they've ever had before. And so in hearing some of your testimony before and seeing how you grew and scaled our calling, that side of the ministry, it really points to your administrative skills, and it's kind of proof in the pudding of what the calling is on, not our calling, but what your calling is on your life for the the growth of that ministry and how you're able to grow and scale things. What are some of the key levers that you use to grow and scale organizations?
Well, I mean, let's use our calling as an example because they're a great example. We look for ministries that have a really strong leader who's great at the mission, great at the programs. They can be great at a lot of things, right? But we want to find a leader that's called, and there's no shadow of a doubt to what they're doing, that they're called to that. Wayne Walker, the founder of Our Calling, is that guy. And what he did with excellence is he stewarded a ministry that just had built an immense amount of trust about everybody he ever worked with. And so when I stepped in to work with Our Calling, and when we step in to work with ministries through Crown and Covenant, we're looking for that type of picture to where we could just add the piece that is missing. And for Our Calling, it was donor relations. And I could say without any pride at all, what happened at Our Calling would not have ever happened without a leader like Wayne that was called to lead a ministry like that. And we just got to I got to come beside him and help steward that ministry with him and help it grow to reach its potential. And they continue to do so today. So we want to find powerful ministers are called. They're typically really good at the mission and the program. You think about it, like the typical person that's called in the ministry, they are more people driven most days, right? They are not really overly excited about going and putting the operations together or the fundraising together, and it turns into a necessity to sustain their growth. So that's where we'll step in and help them do that. We'll interview ministries, just interviewed a new ministry this week that just end up not being a good fit for us. That's okay. They're doing what they're doing a good job, but for us to come help them scale isn't going to actually increase their kingdom impact. What we want to see is let's say they're an evangelism focused ministry or discipleship focused ministry. It's like, well, they're able to disciple, we'll call it like 500 people on their current operating system. But if we were to get involved and infuse them with whether a gift or infuse them with some knowledge and some coaching and some team members and some help, we could get that to 5,000 people in a relatively short amount of time. That's who we're looking for. And those ministries oftentimes are not startups. Been around for a little while. They've gone through the trenches for a little while, and they're ready and willing to accept the help that we have to offer.
So I heard you say a couple things, and I'll try to summarize my thoughts. So it's not always a one size fits all strategy. You're able to see kind of what they need. Like for Our Calling, it was the fundraising side of things, but they might be good at the ministry, but there's some other components on the back end that they're not so good at. And you're able to identify through strategic insight and understanding the big picture and how to get from point A to point B.
I mean, like John can speak to this, especially with what we did with Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu, but a nonprofit is a business. They just don't keep the money at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Everything gets poured back into the ministry and back into the ministry. So like John's expertise, it could be really vital in some areas for the ministries. My expertise could be really vital for some areas of the ministries we partner with, but we both get to bring things to the table for our ministries that we're focused on to help them do that. I can't say I could personally identify all the opportunities myself, and John I think could say he could personally identify all, but together and amongst the people that we also work with, it gets pretty easy to get in there and start picking and finding, oh, this has a ton of potential. But John, you should tell them a little bit about like how we did that with Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, and I think Patrick hit on it. Scaling a business is scaling a business, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit. And I think what's really difficult about being an entrepreneur is scaling a business, right? Especially from scratch. It's build a little bit, and it's, you got to be pretty strategic, and you're usually limited on resources. And, so that is a skill set, and it's a skill set that usually takes a lot of years kind of going through the fire to get. And so, with another guy that's on the MBL team who founded Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu, unbelievably passionate leader, all kinds of opportunity being created. And really we're getting a lot of momentum, merchandise sales and different things. And, they're in the trenches focused on their God mission, right? Well, it's very easy for us to come in and look at kind of the business side and the scaling of it. And, simple little things like, hey, we've got a bookkeeper you need to start getting some income statements so you can actually analyze this. And, and again, he's not a finance guy. He's not, so an income statement. Okay. Well, bookkeeper, so it was just, they have such a good passion and such good momentum. You can see how God just has them poised to explode. But we go in, grab a bookkeeper, grab them a tax accountant, start to put in place some systems and procedures, help them think through the merchandising to get those sales up, to fund themselves better. And, one of them was the guy that works for us was, really should be in the president role and really should be getting compensated. But, there's a board and, and they all have their different experiences and different thought processes. And we were able, in that case, we did help with the tax account. We did help with, some of the merchandising and bookkeeping, but we were also able to give a gift to pay the salary of the guy that works with us to go step into the president position. And by funding that gift, it allowed us to kind of put our money where our mouth was to get the rest of the board on board with a longer term compensation plan, because really you could see how God had it all laid out. It just needed a little bit of resource, get this guy in the right position with the right team and a little compensation so that he can still survive on his family and doesn't have to keep, I need to work more for MBL because I got to make more money. And so just, a couple little tweaks here and there and a little bit of money. And I mean, year over year, they've doubled, almost tripled their revenue.
Wow.
I mean, they're nationwide.
Jesus and
Jiu-Jitsu. It's unbelievable. Top 4%.
It's a podcast.
Well, it's a podcast. They do, big things where I think their biggest event, they had 400 people come and, they do a testimony before and then they roll and they bring in a world-class believer instructor that volunteers their time. That's pretty famous usually. And so, what's interesting about Jiu-Jitsu and why my buddy has a passion for it is, it's a lot of special forces, first responders. I mean, it's these men that get on the mat and have combat, right? So these are your men that don't want to be vulnerable. These are your men that don't want to cry. These are your men that aren't necessarily going to go into a church's doors, right? And so it's his kind of passion and goal was, I'm going to meet these guys where they're at. I'm going to meet them on the mat. And build that relationship and show them that vulnerability and show, and it's been really powerful. I mean, a lot of guys that have never stepped foot in a church have become believers and been baptized by just building something that meets them where they are, where they're passionate, where they want to be. And it's just amazing. I mean, it's exploding. They're doing events nationwide, roll-a-thons and just all kinds of stuff. And, top 3% in the world podcast now. So yeah, pretty exciting. But again, we were able to, it wasn't a ton of time. It wasn't a ton of money. It was just, the way I look at it is I've been blessed with certain gifts of entrepreneurship and learnings of scaling businesses. And other people have been blessed with being on the front lines and having a passion to go build a ministry. And I think those gifts in isolation are not much use to God.
Yeah.
But when you can see those gifts. And I think one of the skill sets of an entrepreneur is putting the right people in the right place with the right gifts to, kind of overshadow their weaknesses and emphasize their strengths. And so I look at it now and it's like, really analyze my relationships as your gift and calling is to be on the front lines for God. My gift and calling is to generate and gather resources. And if we can combine those callings, you get something really powerful and special. And I feel like it's a broken relationship in this world. And that's kind of where the creation of Crown and Covenant has come in to really articulate to people, your business is not yours. It's a gift and a skill set you've been given to steward for the ultimate purpose, which is the guys on the front lines, delivering souls and bringing people to Christ. So let's merge those.
And we've already been talking about Crown and Covenant, but I want to touch on that some more. But as you were talking, I was thinking of this metaphor, how a restaurant can have the same ingredients and be producing, a run-of-the-mill dish. But here comes a world-renowned chef, 5-star Michelin chef, comes in with the same ingredients, produces a dish that's unheard of, the best tasting dish, unbelievable. So it's like you're taking those same ingredients and you're the 5-star Michelin chef being able to lay those out in a better organization to where it takes and elevates that dish to something completely new and better. Crown and Covenant Foundation, we've already been talking about it. What sparked the vision to well, actually, let's go ahead and paint the picture. What is Crown and Covenant? And then
Yeah.
what was the vision behind it?
It's give you a little bit of a backstory there. When I met John, how many years ago was that? 6, 7 years ago, something like that. One of the first times I met John, he said, "Do you guys want to go on vacation with us?" And I don't normally go on vacations with my family with strangers, but we said yes. And so Shelly, my wife, our 4 kids, John, Allison, and their 2 kids, we all went to Colorado and started a tradition of doing that annually. But what we talked about nearly the whole time was, John was like wanted to talk about how God could use his platform, and then I was wanting to talk about how God could use my platform, and then we talk about that. What's that look like together? And similar to the MBL story, we've talked about a lot of different things. We talked about a lot of different avenues. But I remember the first time I was at John's house, which was probably a couple months after we went on vacation, a couple weeks after we went on vacation. He goes, "Man, I want to get MBL to a place one day where we have a nonprofit." And he's like, "Maybe you could come in and run that nonprofit." And so we liked the idea, but it was just an idea at the time. It felt so far in the future, like it might not even be possible, and we didn't know what that would even look like. About a year ago, just about a year ago, even almost on the date, I was having lunch with a good friend of mine named Bobby, and he does commercial real estate, and good dude, loves the Lord. We've been friends for a long time, and he goes, "Hey Patrick, if I sit because I'd gone to the private sector to go earn some extra additional income for our family, and I'd only been doing that for 2 years, and still working with ministries, still doing some things, but the lion's share of my time was all just producing for the private sector, and it was fine. It just wasn't what I was necessarily designed to do forever." So Bobby calls, or we're having lunch. He goes, "Hey, if I send all my business to John, would he pay you to free you up to go back into ministry?" And I was like, "Yeah, he will." Then I called John. I'm like, "Would you?" But it's not a conversation we had already had.
Yeah.
What if we could use the MBL title business, a commodity business? Everybody has to use it that's doing a real estate transaction anyway, right? You have to use title if you're doing a real estate transaction. MBL is a niche elite team that does a great job. Bobby had already used them once or twice in the past. And so I knew the answer was yes, but we had to figure out the logistics. So John and I get on the phone, we work with Bobby a little bit, and Bobby's like, "I'm going to send my deals your way," which is great. So that then freed me up. And, we still have to gather more title business even today. That's one of those, the transactions aren't super frequent, but they're large, so they help sustain me to go run full-time ministry. But that was kind of the catalyst that kicked us off to go, now we can think really clearly on what does this ministry look like that John and I will start. And because I was already doing a lot of consulting, because that was our joint expertise made sense, and we had this multiple years of dreaming together of what could we do with our platforms to advance the kingdom, Crown and Covenant was formed out of that.
Okay.
And so we built these 3 pillars: Crown, Covenant, Foundation. And Crown, we really, our terminology is very similar to yours. We call it Kings and Priest is how we originally started talking about it, but keensandpriest.com wasn't available, so we had to go with something else. So we went with Crown and Covenant Foundation. Crown representing the resource gatherers, the entrepreneurs, the business leaders, the folks that went into the world and built wealth. Covenant representing the people that were called to vocational ministry. And Foundation is our giving arm, how we give to those ministries that we're working with. So we, in a lot of ways, we're very young and we have a lot of dreams, but in a lot of ways we see ourselves as a donor advised fund, a DAF, right? But traditional donor advised funds, you give your money into it and then you have to figure out, now where will I give my money to these ministries? And then you have to direct those dollars as the donor. With us, they give to Crown and Covenant Foundation, and because my salary is fully covered through the business transaction, we don't really have any true overhead to speak of, right? We have to pay for our insurance and our website and stuff like that, but very minimal. So then the lion's share of all of our giving goes back into these investments, into these ministries, and we just see a future where people are giving substantially to Crown and Covenant Foundation, and then we're making these strategic gifts that take a ministry and 10x's them, or 5x's them, or 2x's them. Right, 2x is still a huge growth, but what we saw in Jesus in Jiu-Jitsu, nearly a 3x. What we saw with one of our ministries in Arizona, just anti-trafficking, we saw a near 3x growth year one and a near 2x growth the next year, just over 2x growth the next year. So we know this model works, And as we continue to grow it, we just could see this great kingdom impact happening. But again, Crown, business leaders surrendering their business to the Lord. Covenant, us partnering with these nonprofits to expand their kingdom potential. Foundation is how we invest into the ministries we partner with.
And that was going to be my next question. You just answered it. Was, business fuels ministry and ministry transforms business. How do you see the vice versa happening? Ministry kind of affecting business, because you're affecting the ministries. In a lot of cases, in these conversations, weren't having a lot in the past. It feels like there's a lot more conversations around business and ministry together in the form of different organizations. And so how do you see kind of ministry affecting business?
John, you should probably answer that one, but I'll just say this real quick. I think ministry is a business. I think business is a ministry. Like, I think that to run a ministry really well, you have to have appropriate practices in place. And I think that the run a business as a kingdom leader really well, you have to have a lot of biblical principles in place. But those two relationships are typically completely divided and isolated. And so we see a world where they run together. But you could probably answer it differently.
I think, I think part of the problem is exactly how we're articulating it, right? Like, it's separate things. And I truly believe that's part of the fall and brokenness of the world, right? I think the design was they're one thing, right? And I think a lot of believers do separate, well, this is my business, so I make business decisions. So I make of the world decisions because it's my business.
Right.
And on Sunday, I make believer decisions. That's not, I don't think, how it was designed to be, right? Like, to me, to run a business, which is steward God's resources, well, how can you do that without wise counsel? How can you do that without running next to priest, right? And how can priests do what they want to do without running next to a business guy, right? Because again, I feel when they're separated, they work very inefficiently. And when they're brought together, that's when you really unlock God's power, right? That's when you get the 1 + 1 is 5. And so, I think a lot of it, I just think that relationship's broken. Yeah. And there's a lot of meat being left on the bone that can easily be unlocked if we as business guys start, really viewing our business as just a stewardship of a gift and a resource to bless people and grow the kingdom. Mm. And when you really start looking at it through that lens, now you start coming up with creative things. Well, man, I'm going to make Isaac the pastor within our business, and he's going to love on people and help make sure we understand what our teammates are doing. By the way, he wants to found this ministry. Okay, we're going to make sure he has the flexibility and the resource to be able to do so. And, let's set Patrick free and use this platform to where he can go fully focus on his gifts with, and so you start to think very creatively with your business on not just how do I increase profit and increase margin so that we can make more money. I'm applying that same strategy that allows you to increase margin and make more money to how do I unlock resources to grow the kingdom and bless people. Now, all of a sudden, we have 2 people running full-time ministries on our for-profit staff. And guess what? The business is still being blessed. It's still doing well. And the resources are being able to be provided to where we're making more money by doing it that way. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? You'd be afraid that, if I spend all this money over here and they're not focused full-time on the business, what happens when we run out of money or if that doesn't work? Well, you start to see this magical equation, right? Where God multiplies. He just, I told a guy the other day, I said how much money we had in the bank. We were going to do another distribution. And he's like, really? He's the one closing. I mean, he's the one that knows what revenue's coming in. I go, man, I don't even know. I go, yep. I literally think every day God's just putting money in our bank account. And again, I'm not saying that when you follow God and get this equation right, that the blessing is necessarily a financial resource. Right. That may or may not be the case. But you just start to see a multiplier effect of 1 loaf of bread feeds how many,
One puts 1,000 to flight, 2 puts 10,000 to flight.
Yeah. That's right. And I think a lot of religions get this more right than we do, right? Like Judaism, Muslims, they're very good about coming together and having a culture where they bless each other and work together for the greater good of whatever they believe.
Why is that?
And I think Christians have almost run capitalistic, right? No, this is my business. I earn this, right? If you look at most business owners, they're type A personalities, they're accomplishers, right? They're Ironman athletes, they're college athletes. They're, they learned that if I put in 1+1 and I put in this work, I'm going to get this reward because I put in this work. And so you almost are raised and geared up in this culture to, I did this and I accomplished this and I have money because I was disciplined and worked harder than you. Not, no, I only controlled 1% of that. Really, if I step back from it, I've just been very blessed and gifted some stuff. And so I just think we've kind of flipped that equation, right? I think we've just lost our way to where we don't really think about, well, I'm going to use that engineer not only because he's good, but this guy's good too. But he's a believer, and I know he's running a business to follow God and bless people. So that's going to come into my decision on whether I use him or not. Christian business owners don't think like that.
Is that just a Western thought process, or is that more in other countries? I'll have to ask Josiah, because we were actually talking about that the other day, that same scenario where these other religions do promote from within, per se. It's this is great that we're having this conversation. And one thing I wanted to talk about or just touch on, you mentioned the king and the priest idea and how the kings can partner with the priest. But I just want to encourage both of you guys as well. You're also operating both simultaneously as well, where from a priest standpoint, you're going into the throne room to communicate with the Father and pray and listen and get direction directly from the throne room as a priest, because the priest can only go into the temple. So you operate from a priestly standpoint, and then you come out as a king. And so that's why we're a part of this group of kings and priests, and we're operating under the same scenario that Jesus is. I mean, he is the king, ultimate king and priest that we can model after. That's right. Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and I don't really know where to land this thing.
One thing to what you just said.
Yeah.
I think that we totally agree, 100% agree with you. And then where our nuance, I would say, is like, letting the left hand be the left hand and the shoulder be the shoulder and the elbow. And so, spiritually speaking, yes, we operate all as priests and kings. And then where our little nuance is that we see people that are really gifted at ministering the gospel, people that are really gifted at gathering resources, people that are really gifted at, and so that's where we've, used some of that similar language. But to go back and go, 100%, like, we're all priests and kings by the grace of God. And so we agree with that. And I would tell you, where we want to see our business leaders go is really be able to bring that priestlyhood into their business, into their life. And to John's point, let God be the shareholder, the primary shareholder of your business. You might be the CEO of that business, but if you own a good business and you hire a great CEO, you expect him to run the business right, but you hold the power and authority to walk in and to call a change if you ever want to change, or to make a decision if you ever want to make a decision. And that's our encouragement, is like, man, God's going to call you as a business leader every so often to do something that is, go ahead and pay that debt. Go ahead and pay that debt. Go do that thing. And you're like, man, I'm scratching my head because it feels abnormal, but I'm familiar with the voice of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. So I'm going to be obedient to it. And whether I get to see the fruit or I don't get to see the fruit. And to us, it's, we don't have a formula of this is what it looks like to be a kingdom leader that has surrendered their business to God. But we do know that God speaks, and we know that you could hear him. And so, like, it just goes back to follow the Lord with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind. And when he speaks, submit and listen, be obedient.
Yeah, I think we need to have these conversations more from this higher level standpoint. I feel like we're talking from a very high level kingdom influence impact, where we're all one body. You may be your gifts are foot, your gifts are spleen, your gift is the nose. And from a Western society in the church, it's been, I've got my own thing, I'm going to do my own thing well. Even in business, I would say some things that would catch people off guard, where I would tell them, I want my competition to do well. I think the business is plenty for all of us to have. I just want to be the best. I want to do things with excellence where I get the majority of the market share. I don't care. I want them to be blessed. I want them to grow and to, there's plenty of market share. I can't have it all. If we had that same perspective, we're all working for the kingdom. And I know we're jumping into this faith-based marketplace realm where I've been able to meet people from C12 or faith-driven entrepreneur or you name it. There's a bunch of them popping up, or it feels like they're popping up. They've probably been around for a long time. I want all of those organizations to do very well because we're all saying the same thing. We might be doing things slightly different and encouraging slightly different, but at the same time, the whole purpose is the kingdom. To your point, it's like how do we encourage this holistic growth for the kingdom? And we need to have that conversation with the marketplace leaders as well as the priestly leaders or the ministry leaders.
And I think I'd take real quick what you just said and go even a step further. I could say I want MBL to be excellent and I want it to have high margins and I want it to do very well and make a lot of resources so that we can go bless people, right? Like I could formulate that and articulate why that's aligned with God maybe. But I step back even from that. What my prayer is for the business is that God's will be done, period. And I always say, I program myself for this, like I'm holding it loosely. If fear starts creeping in, is there going to be enough money? Are we going to do well enough? If God's will is to shut his business down to teach us something, grow us, walk us through the fire, my prayer is I have joy being obedient and having his will be done through me, whether the business is closing or whether the business is blowing up.
Right.
And again, I think that's where we've got to get ourselves, right? We've got to hold it so loosely and trust so deeply that maybe the business failing next year is God's will. And I'm not going to understand that probably. I'm not going to love that. That's going to be tough. But I pray in that scenario, I walk with obedience and joy just like I will when he's blessing the business and I'm getting to go do what I hope his plan is and use those resources to bless other people. And so, I feel like it's easy to want to align with God and be obedient when the story you think he's writing is the story you want him to write. And it's a lot harder when the story is a story you don't like and it's a story of suffering. And I tell my kids this all the time. We don't necessarily grow in the peace times, in the good times. We grow in the suffering. And biblically it tells us have joy in the suffering because God is doing the work.
Right.
And I always am preparing myself for that. Like, hey, I'm not just going to be following God and being obedient if this thing blows up. It's his business. And if it's going to go under, that's his will. And I'm going to be okay with that. So, I think we have to be careful about writing too much of the story ourselves in our own mind, right? It's like we prepare the horses, but he's going to determine where we go with it. And I constantly kind of remind myself, hey, be prepared. His will may be for this not to work out like you want.
And that's a perspective of eternal kingdom impact for your business, good or bad, right? So having that understanding and mentality, I want to leave a legacy. I want to leave an eternal impact through my business, whether I succeed or fail. And that's my priority. That's where I hear where you're going with this. And that's where we've been talking about the Joseph culture and how the whole purpose of the framework that we've been writing is how do you leave a legacy? That's the whole purpose. You can build a business and you could sell it and you can make money, but there's a way to build the business in such a way that builds a eternal impact legacy. And I feel like that's where a lot of business leaders are at today. They've made the money. They've solved the problems. They don't really want to sell. They feel empty inside where I'm a Christian business person, but what's next? What else is there? And I think that this answers that question. We can leave an eternal impact through our business. How do people find Crown and Covenant, and how do people apply for what you're doing.
Yeah. crownandcovenantfoundation.org is our website. There's a form there that people could fill out if they'd like us to come consider them to help invest and grow their and scale their ministry. Or, John, just give out your cell phone number so everybody who just ring you. No, that's the best way to go about it. And we're, always looking for the next ministry to really invest in and partner with to help scale up.
And how do people find MLB title?
Same thing, MB.
Major League Baseball title.
Yeah. Everybody flips that. Yeah, we have a website, and we focus on commercial transactions and nationwide, and then residential transactions in Texas.
Great. Thank you guys for coming. This has been awesome. It's been so good.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you for having
appreciate
us.
it.
Yeah. Wow.